All right. Thank you everyone for joining us. We have a couple more people filing into the room. Welcome to the final session of the advocacy track of the Leadership Summit for 2021. I hope that you've learned a lot through the various sessions of the advocacy track. We want to wrap up. We want to close out today's theme, which is self-advocacy, and how your self-advocacy plays into advocacy on behalf of all people living with mood disorders, as well as functions as a tool toward your own wellness. We're talking about the language that we use and how we use and how our language affects our ability to manage the conversation about mental health. The words that we choose are very important in the theme of the conversation, the direction that conversation is going. But we also want to talk about the history of how we got to where we are at this point in time. And then we have some resources that we also want to share with you as well. And so first up, we're going to be using our interactive software, Slido, again. If you know how to use a QR code, you can scan the one that's on your screen. You can also, if you would prefer, you will have the opportunity to type some short answers. If you would rather use the keyboard on your computer, you can also go to slido.com. That's SLIDO.com. And if you do choose to go to slido.com, you'll get a screen that looks like this one. And right at the top in that blue box, it says joining as a participant. That's where right after the pound sign, also known as a hashtag, you would want to enter the words advocacy track, all run together, no space. It's not case sensitive. It does not matter what you capitalize. And either way, whether you go to slido.com or if you scan that QR code, and if you want to scan that QR code, it will be coming back. On each of the question slides that we'll present, the QR code will be there and you can scan it at that time. You'll get a screen that looks like this one. And down at the bottom, you'll have the very last session, we'll say Friday, which is today, 4 p.m., which is what time it is here in Chicago, where we're presenting from. And my name is Andrew. I'm presenting. Should be the very bottom one on the list. And if I was on my game, I would tell you what color that is coded. But please select that. And if you should happen to accidentally click the wrong thing, give me 1 second here. Then you can, at the top of your question slide, it will say what day and time you're on. And then if you click on that, and it looks like it is kind of a greenish teal code is the color code for today at 3 p.m. if you could double check that says Friday at 3 p.m. and my name, and if it doesn't, you can click on that and you'll get that drop down again, and you can select that that day and time. So the first question is just kind of a temperature check of where people are at in the room. Can you please rate on a 5-star rating scale your experience with the mental health care system? Just broadly speaking, in broad strokes, positive, negative. We have quite a few people giving it 4 out of 5 stars, a couple people right in the middle. So overall, no horror stories cropping out, but also not an A+ rating either. So generally, what words come to mind when you think about the mental health care system? So we have one person saying that the system is the problem, another saying that the system is overburdened and overstressed. So interestingly, to put these words in this word cloud against the previous slide with the 4 out of 5 rating that most people gave their experience, that people do recognize that there are challenges, that there are problems, and that the system is not meeting the needs that it was designed or intended to meet. But most importantly, that participating in the mental health care system is a journey. I also had somebody who added complicated in the chat. Absolutely. So the old paradigm of the mental health care system is very much based in the medical model. But before we go down the track of talking about what's wrong with that paradigm, it's important to know what came before that. Because before that, people were just considered that it was a behavioral problem, that people didn't know how to act right. People didn't know how to behave appropriately. There were words like crazy. There were all kinds of different descriptions for people that we now know were most likely living with a mental health condition. And so the language of mental illness, although we don't consider that to be appropriate today, it came along to really say that this is an actual physical condition. This is actually an illness that the person is dealing with, and it's not appropriate to just tell a person that it's their fault, that they are doing something wrong, that they are bad, which was also one of the connotations of the previous paradigm that came before the medical approach. But the goal of the medical model was not to focus on what the peer brings to the table, but just to focus on the doctor as the expert, and that their job was just to help that person find stability in order to become a contributing member of society to restore meaningful purpose to that person's life. But really just heavily influenced on reducing symptoms. If you can prevent disruptive thoughts, if you can prevent, more importantly is in quotations because that was what was important to them at the time, prevent disruptive actions and people from making other people uncomfortable, then we did our job. Then everything's fine. But there wasn't really an emphasis on what the individual actually wanted to get out of their life. We talked yesterday in our final session about peers being in charge of being involved in the process of defining what treatment looks like and how it helps, what the endpoints are, what the outcomes are for them. So even back in 1999, the Surgeon General of the United States recognized that the goal of services must not be limited to symptom reduction, but should strive for the restoration and of a meaningful and productive life. And so the modern recovery movement steps away from the medical model, from the idea that we just need to address symptoms, help people find stability, and prevent their condition from being disruptive to their life. The recovery movement is more in line with the idea that people with a mental health condition can and do lead productive lives and will actually go on to do great things once they are aware of how to manage their own condition and their own wellness journey. And that people will also recover from living with a mental health condition, that stability is not the only baseline, but that the individual can go on to live the life that they want to live. And so next up on our Slido polling software is a rank order question. And the question is to please rank the events shown in your Slido in the order that you think they happened. So what happened first, then second, and so on. So I'll give you a moment to take a look at all the items on the list and think about which order you think they happened in. And then let's see if anyone has responded yet. So far, we have the Olmstead decision is what people think happened first. Then the Americans with Disabilities Act. Then the Commission on Mental Health. Then SAMHSA was created. And then the Peers Act. So let's go ahead and take a look and see what order they actually happened in. The modern day recovery movement started with the Commission on Mental Health, actually. That was President Carter that signed that executive order. And then from there, we have the Americans with Disabilities Act. We talked about that in our first session today and how that applies to people living with mental health conditions. And again, we will talk more about getting away from the language of mental illness. But again, it's important to note that prior to that designation, that people didn't take mental health seriously, didn't consider it to be a condition that the individual might not be able to just will themselves out of, just control through deciding to not deal with that anymore. Then we have SAMHSA being created. That's the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration, which is a government agency that really sets the standards for the services that are provided, that are offered around mental health. And one of the very key provisions of SAMHSA is the fact that people with lived experience are stakeholders and are in charge of helping to make those policies and decisions. The Olmstead decision, if you have never heard of it before, it was actually a court decision that determined that people with disabilities need to be allowed to live where they choose to live and have appropriate accommodations in order to do that. So we talked about that quite a bit in our first session of the day today, 2 hours ago. We do have a recording of that. If you were not able to join us for that session and would be interested in hearing more about that, we will be making that recording available in the next couple of weeks here. And then we have the entry of the role of the peer specialist. And if you were not able to join us on Tuesday, we talked extensively about peer specialists, what they do, why they do it, and how they do it. And I would encourage you to take advantage of those recordings as well. And so DBSA trains peer specialists. We also do that for the Department of Veterans Affairs, and they are one of the biggest proponents of the use of peer specialists. Peer specialists, if you don't know, are paraprofessionals. They're individuals with lived experience who work in a provider setting. So either a PCP or a psychiatrist will have a peer specialist who works with them and who comes alongside the individual and helps that individual develop their own goals and work toward them by sharing their own experience and sharing their story. And it's so much more than just being able to share your story, but being trained on how to use that story to help someone else. But as you can see from the timeline, that we're starting to move toward people with lived experience being recognized for understanding their own experience, and that clinicians can help promote health and well-being, but they don't have the end-all and be-all say. They don't just prescribe and then the individual, their job is to do what their doctor says. DVSA actually believes in shared decision making. That's one of our messages that we drive, that you are the expert on your own experience and that your doctor is a consultant who can provide options for you, but ultimately the two of you make that decision together, not your doctor making that decision for you. So what are some words that come to mind when you think about recovery? So I see hope, lifelong. It's a journey, not a destination. Enjoyment. That one I find interesting. Thriving. I like that word. That's one that one of the themes that DBSA has come across in some of our work is that people are tired of being told that surviving is as good as it's going to get for them. That people living with mental health conditions can and do thrive and have the right to thrive. Somebody dropped into the chat adventure, for sure. Wellness is coming out strong in this one. And interestingly, we'll talk about this a little more. There's actually a movement that delineates between recovery and wellness, and that that wellness might be the next step in that journey. Some of the things that I don't see on this list, and I'm thankful that I don't, but some people think of recovery as being, right on the precipice. You are right on the edge of things going bad, but you're holding back and it's not going bad because you are recovered. And the idea that, and again, this is where language is so nuanced, that wellness is not holding back from holding things together or holding things from going badly, but that it's actually moving in the opposite direction, that things are moving in a positive direction. And so some more of the differences between the medical model and the recovery model. The aim of the medical model is to treat the problem, treat the symptoms, reduce those symptoms. The main thing is, are you in treatment? Are you, this is a big one, treatment compliant. That is language that DBSA does not use because we don't believe that an individual is being rebellious or doing anything wrong if, for whatever reason they have, the treatment is distasteful to them, that they have the right to choose the life that they want to live, and that it's not that the individual is not complying, it's that the treatment isn't doing what the individual wants it to do and what it needs to and should be doing in order to help that person live the life that they want to live. And the overriding goal is just stability, just a baseline, just not to have problems anymore. Whereas in the recovery model, the aim is rehabilitation. The idea that that an individual can live a self-directed and productive life. So instead of focusing on the problem, focusing on the condition and the symptoms, focusing on what that person wants to get out of their own life, and setting goals and working towards achieving those goals. And the overriding goal is whole health wellness, meaning the whole life of the individual. If a side effect affects your physical health, and you aren't comfortable with that physical condition coming along, then that's not the right treatment for you. That would be one example of that. So what are some of the organizations that embrace each of these models? And this is not to say that there's anything wrong with organizations that do provide medical care and medical solutions to dealing with a mental health condition. It's just that there needs to be more of an understanding around that shared decision making that I was talking about earlier. That and again, DBSA does not endorse treatment, nor do we endorse any particular type of treatment. We believe that each individual's journey to wellness is their own, it's unique, and whatever the individual chooses for their own wellness toolbox is appropriate for them. For those individuals who do choose medical treatment, then that's when we encourage those providers to have a broader, more of a whole health perspective on that treatment option. And actually, I see one thing on my slide here that is a little out of date and needed and should have been changed. Third from the bottom on the right side, you will see the National Council for Behavioral Health. That organization actually changed their name this past year to the National Council on Mental Well-Being, because they took it that seriously. They understand that language is important and that the way we speak about things frames the conversation. And so instead of talking about behavioral health and putting the onus on the individual and choices that that person is making, they understand that we're talking about well-being. We're talking about wellness and striving towards being our best full selves that we can be. So I apologize to them as an organization and to you as my audience for not having that updated on this slide, but it also does provide a good object lesson in what it is that we're talking about today. So like I've said before, the way we use our language can affect what it is that we are framing. Are we blaming the individual and saying that the person was compliant or non-compliant? Or are we recognizing that the individual is just living their life and that the treatment is what had the problem? It was not that the individual had resistant depression, but that the treatment failed to deal with that individual's symptoms. It also affects policies of how people, how organizations choose to prescribe, how they choose to authorize treatments. The language that we use frames all of those conversations. So again, DBSA believes that individuals have the right to choose, and that using language that supports peer-identified recovery wellness goals helps us move that conversation in the right direction. And so at this point, I want to note that language is ever evolving, that it's always in motion. It's not a static fixed code. And so there's no list of right and wrong words that I can give you to say this, not that, because that language will change. What is considered woke today will be a slur in some time from now, 10 to 15 years from now, because people co-opt language, because people abuse language and use words that were once used to describe individuals as insults for each other and other people. And so the point of this conversation is not to give you the words that are all correct, but to cause you to think about the language that you choose and how and why you're using it. Our goal is to improve understanding and set a foundation for a better dialogue across communities. And that will start us down the path toward a future where mental health discussions lead to better health outcomes. So I have another question for you on the Slido, and it's regarding various disease states, if you will, and how stigmatized each of those disease states are. And the measure for that are internet searches around the name and then stigma. And which ones yield the most internet search results and which ones yield the least amount of internet search results. So actually, if you would enter one being the most, I believe there's 4 on the list, 4 being the least. And then we'll see what you think what the answers are. And everyone actually got the number 1 right, that mental health is the most stigmatized on this list according to searches around the words mental health, language, stigma, versus Alzheimer's, language stigma, stroke, language stigma, and heart disease, language stigma. I don't actually remember off the top of my head around stroke and heart disease, but I do remember that Alzheimer's was actually at the bottom of the list. So people don't tend to blame an individual who's experiencing Alzheimer's disease as much as they would blame an individual who's experiencing a mental health condition, or even somebody who has experienced a stroke or is experiencing heart disease for their own condition. So the way we approach these conversations can help to control the conversation. When we approach a conversation with curiosity, it gives us the power to not impose our own understanding on someone else's language, but instead to ask that person what they might mean by their language. So when somebody uses language that might be concerning to you, instead of just being very confrontational and telling the individual, you can't talk that way, you shouldn't talk that way. If you approach the conversation, ask them, what did you mean by that? Can you talk more about that? People will be more open to hearing our perspectives and to having an understanding if we encourage them to consider changing the language that they use. And it might be that they didn't actually mean the thing that we perceived them to mean. And so opening up those lines of communication then fosters better understanding. And humility allows us to not structure the conversation according to our own language preferences, but to let the conversation build on somebody else's. In my role as the Community Engagement Program Manager here at TBSA, have had several conversations with people who have told me, I do not have a mental health condition. I have a mental illness. For that individual, it is very important to them that other people understand that they are dealing with an illness. Personally, I don't use the language of mental illness. As an organization, DBSA doesn't really use the language of mental illness because it suggests that people are ill. That going back to what I was saying earlier about recovery, that the person is always on the precipice of things going badly. Instead, we like to have a focus on wellness. But I would never tell that individual, you can't talk that way about your own experience. If that is what that person believes, is that it's important for other people to understand, I am dealing with a mental illness, then that is the appropriate language for that individual. And it's not my role to correct them when talking about their own experience, but I don't use that language when I'm talking about somebody else's experience. And here's a quote that, and actually much of the content in this slide is actually from a white paper that's available to all of you, should be in the handouts on VFairs, which you used in order to enter the Leadership Summit. The white paper is by Nexus, and DBSA had a hand in helping to develop that white paper, and we've had many conversations around this presentation. This quote is actually from the developer of the polio vaccine, Jonas Salk, who said, what people think about the moment of discovery is actually the discovery of the question. That we think that once we learn something, once we know something, we've got it all figured out. But actually, we're just opening up, what is the question? What is it that that we need to learn more about? So where do we go from here? And there's not a neat answer. As I mentioned 2 slides ago, that the language is ever evolving, that it changes, that words mean different things than they did 20 years ago, and they will mean different things 10 or even 20 years from now. But the main point is, how are you thinking about the language that you use? And so the other handout that was made available to you through VFairs, beside the white paper that I referenced, is DBSA's Compassionate Language Guide. And we just ask that people think about 10 different strategies that you can use when evaluating your own language and the language that you choose. And I know that our host, our Zoom jockey, Eric, asked people to place questions in the chat. And I would encourage you again, if you have any questions, please place those in the chat. We are approaching the end of our session, and we'll have some time for answering those questions. So we encourage you to defy definitions. What do I mean by that? Well, it means think about the language that you're using, and don't place yourself in a box. Don't place other people in a box. Always be curious about the language that you use, and try to find the language that's going to describe what it is that you're trying to convey. So choose your language thoughtfully. We often, it's much easier to use shorthand, to use an adjective and a noun to describe something, or worse yet, to use an adjective as a noun. But when you want to put the person at the center of the conversation, person who lives with a mental health condition is a much longer clause than just saying mentally ill or the mentally ill. And so we often use shorthand in order to communicate more quickly with other people who understand what we're talking about. But that also puts people into boxes and does not respect people's experiences and the individual as a whole person. And so we just encourage you to think more carefully about the language that we use. Avoid distancing. That means othering. Language like they and them, those people. It really creates an opportunity for dehumanizing. Now, here's my flip side on that. I can't tell you how many times I've had people ask me, so what's your connection to this? Do you have a mood disorder? And I'm going to disclose to this group, I do identify as experiencing depression. But now I'm going to give you my second caveat to that, which is there is importance, there is value in peer support. There is value in knowing that somebody else gets it and understands what you're going through. But I also think that if we put too much of an emphasis on, do you get it, don't you get it? Can I talk to you, or am I gonna write you off and not share anything with you? We give other people, when we create that cloister, we give other people then the opportunity to distance themselves from us and say, well, those people over there, they're all crazy, them. And so we encourage you not to distance yourself from other people and their situations, but also not to create situations that would allow other people to do that to us either. I hope that makes sense. If not, I'm sure I can address it in the Q&A time. Separate the person from the condition. That goes back to that choosing your language, not using shorthand, putting the person first, and then describing what that individual may or may not be dealing with and may or may not be experiencing with. Don't make assumptions about what those experiences are. When we say someone suffers from depression, maybe that person doesn't suffer at all. Maybe that person just has an experience. Now, again, going back to, I've had people tell me I absolutely have a mental illness, not a mental health condition. I've also had people tell me I absolutely suffer from depression. It is suffering, but that is something that that individual chose to disclose to me, not that I can assume is true of anybody and everybody who has a mental health condition. Allow for personal choice. Don't prescribe what that individual needs to do in order to straighten their life out. Allow for the individual to make their own choices about what's right and best for them in order to find their own wellness. Accept responsibility for your language. That I have had many times when I've used shorthand, when I'm in a conversation and I just say something and I realize, oh, I said the wrong thing. I shouldn't have said it like that. And sometimes it's appropriate for me to go back and talk to the person that I said that to and say, hey, you know, I use this language and I really shouldn't have said it like that. And I wish I had said this instead. And generally, that's well received. We've all also been on the receiving end of the word police, telling us, you can't talk like that, you shouldn't say that. And so again, I'm not encouraging anyone here to be the word police, but in those experiences, if you have the humility and the curiosity to say, you know what, because as soon as that happens, what happens to most of us? Our defenses go up. We feel attacked, and so we want to justify the way that we've behaved. But being able in that moment to see things from a different perspective and say, you know, maybe I shouldn't have used that language. And then DBSA has a specific call out for the media. And that is to avoid sensationalizing when there's any number of major crises. And this goes back to the distancing, number 3. The media tends to try to pick apart, why did this happen? Did this person have something wrong with them? What caused this? When the truth is that in reality, people living with mental health conditions are actually more likely to be the victim of a violent crime than to be the perpetrator of a violent crime. Number 9, in fiction, to portray people with mental health conditions realistically, to not caricaturize people living with mental health conditions. I don't know how many of you were able to join us on Wednesday for the plenary session with Maurice Bernard, and talking about how his own lived experience of bipolar disorder and the fact that the character he plays on TV is an individual living with a mental health condition, living with bipolar disorder. That representation is important, that not seeing any depictions suggests in our society that it's something to not be talked about, that it's shameful. But when we get those representations, we want to make sure that we're not skewering the character, that we're not making a joke out of people's experiences, but that we're showing realistic people who happen to deal with a particular set of circumstances and a condition. I believe I have reached the end of my slides. And so I'm going to stop sharing, and I'm going to open it up now to any questions anyone might have. I did see a couple of things go by in the chat.
Yeah, I don't think I see any specific questions unless they're coming directly to you.
There was one, what language do you use as an alternative to mood disorder or bipolar disorder? I find that making someone in a manic state identify as having a disorder can be very counterproductive. I would absolutely agree with that. I think with regard to bipolar, I have often heard it referred to just as bipolar, not as bipolar disorder. As far as mood disorders are concerned, it is an unfortunate component of the English language, that is what has been designated for depression and bipolar. That when you look at the language of mental health condition, a condition, that what does that word mean? It means a situation. It just means something to be dealt with, whereas a disorder says things are out of order, that things are not as they should be. So I would steer clear of just using the words mood disorder if that's a problem, and just refer to depression and just refer to bipolar. I would steer clear of calling it bipolar disorder and just call it bipolar. I don't think it's an unfair characterization, nor is it inaccurate to call it bipolar condition. I don't know if that helps at all. And I did have one question asking for clarification about what I mean when I say the words white paper. A white paper is a designation of a type of publication, and it just refers to it's not a research paper. It doesn't indicate any particular, it's not about a particular study. It's just, and it's not a literature review either. It's kind of a step below that on the publication process of looking at the research that's out there and making some observations about it. And so I don't actually know the origin of that. Eric, I don't know if you can help me out with that.
Yeah. I'm not sure the origin necessarily, but I think the concept is essentially a white paper is a compilation of different perspectives or different information, but then usually offers some either recommendations or policy solutions or something like that. So
I have this on no authority, but I'm just speculating that it refers to the blank paper that you start with to write.
Yes, that's, I think so.
Any other questions? So do you think do you think the media and pharma, I'm not sure, via commercialization has helped with the issue of stigma? I think that one of the things that I personally think about the issue of stigma is the more we talk about it, the more we get things out into the open, the more we address stigma. And the more we combat it, the more we stamp it out. And so do I think that, I'm guessing the question is seeing commercials for treatments around various mental health conditions on, does that reduce stigma? And I personally, again, DBSA does not endorse treatment nor any particular type of treatment. As an individual, I would say I do think so. I think that when you talk to younger people, my wife is a high school teacher. Her students talk very openly about their mental health and the mental health of others. And I think that one piece of that would be growing up in an environment where you're openly exposed to media around, oh, do you deal with this? Do you deal with that? Do you deal with this? Here's something that can help you with that. Here's something that could help you with that over there. And so it becomes less of a shh, we don't talk about that, and more of a, this is just a thing that people deal with. And here are some of the ways that people can deal with this. That's my personal opinion on that. And I've got somebody that agreed with me on that. So I tend to say I have a condition, not that I am the condition when describing myself to others. What are your thoughts around that? And yes, absolutely. That is one of DBSA's strong positions, is separating the individual from the experience and saying, this is something that I experience, and not saying I am I am depressed. Well, no, I'm not actually depressed right now. I deal with depression. I have depression from time to time. Um, and that was one of the things, if any of you were able to join us for some of our other sessions where we've had external people talking about their own experience. I heard someone say, I am bipolar, and someone asked about that, and the individual kind of said, well, that's kind of what it was called when I was younger. And so that's the way I think about it, and that's the way I came up. And that's, again, goes back to, I'm not going to be the word police and tell somebody you can't talk this away about your experience. But I do encourage them to consider what effect that has on other people listening to them.